The rejected Omega whispered, "You're being betrayed." The Alpha King canceled the ceremony and lock. Within the Grand Palace, lanterns glimmered like captive stars, lighting halls that echoed with anticipation and whispered plots. Tonight, the Alpha King, revered and feared, was to wed a consort whose lineage promised to strengthen his rule. Nobles from every corner of the kingdom had gathered, their finery dazzling in torchlight, their eyes sharp with ambition. Yet in the shadowed gallery above, a figure watched silently. The Omega, long exiled from the court for a past disagreement with the king, moved like a ghost. Their cloak was dark as midnight, blending seamlessly with the shadows of the palace. Eyes sharp, mind alert, they had returned not for revenge but to whisper truths that had been buried in silence. The Alpha King, tall and commanding, waited at the dais. His armor gleamed faintly under the light, a symbol of power and authority. Yet behind his strong posture, his mind wrestled with unease. Rumors of betrayal had reached him in the past days, whispers that the chosen consort's family plotted not only to elevate themselves, but to undo him entirely. His pride told him to dismiss such fears. His instincts screamed otherwise. The court murmured as the ceremony began. Minstrels played a solemn tune, echoing against the stone walls, while nobles knelt and watched, their faces painted with expectation and curiosity. The king's steps toward the dais were steady, his crown catching the lantern light, but his heart beat in quiet unrest. From her shadowed perch, the Omega descended silently. Their presence was unnoticed until the softest of whispers carried across the cold air. "You are being betrayed," the Omega said. The words were not loud, but they struck the king's ears with the force of a thunderclap. The king froze. His eyes scanned the hall, trying to locate the voice, but it seemed to float unseen, a whisper carried by the shadows themselves. "Who speaks?" he demanded, his voice a mix of authority and caution. The Omega stepped into view, their hood falling back to reveal features both familiar and impossible to forget. The king's gaze caught theirs, and for a moment the world seemed to narrow to the space between them. Memories flickered, the past rejection, the harsh words, the misunderstandings that had sent the Omega away years ago. And yet here they were, returning not with vengeance but with warning. "You must trust me," the Omega said. "They will not stop until the throne is taken from you. The consort's family plans more than marriage, they plan your end." Gasps rose from the courtiers. Whispers filled the hall, sharp as blades. Nobles looked at each other, uncertainty flickering across faces once confident in ceremony. The king's mind raced. Every instinct he had trained for battle, every lesson in courtly intrigue told him to be cautious. But his heart, buried under years of command and solitude, recognized the truth in the Omega's eyes. The king took a deliberate step forward. "Show me proof," he commanded, his voice low yet resonant, carrying across the hall. The Omega produced a small, folded scroll, hidden within the folds of their cloak. "This was intercepted hours ago," they said. "It names the conspirators, details their plans. You must not marry tonight. Delay or you will lose everything, your power, your allies, perhaps even your life." The courtiers stirred. Murmurs of disbelief and scandal rippled through the hall. The king's chest tightened. Every eye was upon him, every noble weighing his next move. But the truth in the Omega's words resonated within him. He remembered the nights spent in quiet study of the kingdom, the times he had trusted his instincts over the counsel of others. And tonight, those instincts screamed. The king's hand rested on the hilt of his sword, a subtle signal of authority. "Cease the ceremony," he commanded, his voice cutting through the murmurs like steel through cloth. A collective gasp filled the hall. The musicians faltered mid-note. The bride, poised and regal, froze, her hand resting on the ceremonial garb. The nobles' expressions ranged from shock to outrage. Some whispered accusations, others dared not breathe. The king's eyes did not waver from the Omega. "You have shown courage to return," he said quietly, almost to himself. "You may yet save this kingdom from ruin, though your place here was denied before." The Omega inclined their head, a shadow of a smile crossing their lips. "I did not come for glory, only for the truth. And for you to see the danger before it is too late." The hall descended into confusion. Guards moved to restrain the Omega, but the king's raised hand stopped them. "They stay. No one will touch them. Not now, not ever." His voice carried the weight of command, yet beneath it lingered something softer, something that had not been heard in these halls in years. Trust. Outside the palace, the wind howled through the towers. Lanterns swayed, casting dancing shadows that seemed alive with whispered secrets. Within the hall, the tension was nearly unbearable. The king's decision to halt the ceremony had shattered the expected order, but it had also revealed a fragile truth. Loyalty was not bought with gold or titles, and power without wisdom was meaningless. The Omega moved closer to the king, their presence a silent challenge. They had once been dismissed, their counsel ignored, yet now the court looked upon them with awe, curiosity, and fear. The king felt an unfamiliar stir of emotion, something beyond duty, beyond reason. A pang of regret, a flicker of longing, something that refused to be named. "Tell me everything," the king said, his tone both commanding and cautious. "I will listen, and I will act." The Omega nodded, unrolling the scroll with careful hands. "The conspiracy is deep," they said, voice low. "It involves those closest to you. The chosen consort is only a pawn. There are others, nobles and counselors, who have sought to weaken you for months. They expected the ceremony to solidify their plan, but now they will scramble. We must move quickly." The king's mind raced, sorting truth from deception, loyalty from ambition. He remembered every lesson learned in war and council chambers. Every battle had taught him that the enemy often wore the face of a friend. And yet, despite the danger, he felt a thread of something rare, hope, tempered with the fire of trust. "Then we move," he said finally. "Tonight we reclaim control. Tonight we unmask the traitors, and you will help me." The Omega's gaze met his. A silent acknowledgement passed between them, a recognition of history, of mistakes, of paths that had diverged and now converged once more. From the shadows of the gallery, a figure watched, hidden, yet attentive. The conspirators' lips curled into a faint smile, unreadable, dangerous. Their plan had not been fully revealed, and the king's interruption only made them more determined. A storm was coming, one that would test loyalty, courage, and the fragile bonds of the heart. The king turned toward the hall, facing the courtiers who had expected ceremony and pomp. "The wedding is canceled," he announced, voice steady, ringing with authority. "No union will occur until this kingdom is safe from deceit. And those who conspire against me will answer for their treachery." Shock rippled through the hall. Some fell to their knees, others whispered fervently, and a few dared to glance toward the Omega, whose presence now radiated quiet power and authority. The king's gaze returned to the Omega. "We have work to do," he said, his voice softer now, almost personal, "and the night is far from over." The Omega inclined their head, ready to guide him, ready to face dangers both known and hidden. "I am with you," they said, "but beware. Not all shadows hide truth, some hide death." The king's hand tightened on the hilt of his sword, a mixture of readiness and unease. The night outside whispered warnings, the palace walls seemed to breathe tension, and the first steps toward unraveling a conspiracy had been taken. Yet beneath it all, a quieter tension lingered between the Alpha King and the Omega who had once been rejected, whose wisdom now guided him, whose presence stirred something neither could yet name. A bond had begun to form in the crucible of danger and trust, one that could change the kingdom, or perhaps their hearts forever. As the hall emptied into anxious whispers, and the first stars of dawn shone weakly against the horizon, a single thought burned in the king's mind. He had halted the ceremony, but the greater battle had only just begun. And in that battle, he realized, he could not face the shadows alone. The Omega remained close, silent yet unyielding, their eyes reflecting the flickering torchlight and something far deeper, an unspoken promise that the truth would be revealed, and perhaps so would the hearts of those brave enough to seek it. Outside, the mist swirled, hiding dangers yet unseen. The kingdom held its breath. And in the silence that followed, one question lingered in every mind. Who could truly be trusted when even the king's closest allies might betray him? The palace of Urindor, though grand and magnificent, had corners that seemed darker than the night outside. Hallways twisted like serpents, staircases led to hidden chambers, and enchanted wards whispered faintly to those who knew how to listen. The Alpha King walked these halls silently, flanked by the Omega, whose presence now carried authority and quiet command. Together they moved as one, yet the tension between them was palpable. Trust, fragile and new, balanced on the edge of every whispered step. The king's mind replayed the events of the cancelled ceremony. The court had erupted into confusion, some nobles plotting behind closed doors, others staring in stunned disbelief. But the king had learned something vital. Appearances were fragile, and true loyalty was rare. And the Omega, once cast aside, was now his compass in a storm of deception. "Do you truly believe the conspiracy runs this deep?" the king asked, his voice low as they moved through the palace corridors. The Omega's eyes gleamed in the flickering torchlight. "Yes. The chosen consort is only a piece of the game. The true threat lies among those you trust most. They are ambitious, patient, and clever. They will not hesitate to strike when you least expect it." The king's jaw tightened. His life had been built on strategy, on seeing threats before they appeared. Yet the thought that betrayal lingered so close to his throne unsettled him. He remembered nights spent alone in the council chambers, wrestling with doubts he dared not voice, and realized that this threat was different, intimate, dangerous, and personal. They paused before a massive door, carved with runes that glimmered faintly in the dim light. The Omega traced a finger over one of the symbols. "This chamber holds records, letters, and messages. If we can decipher them, we might find proof of the conspiracy, enough to stop it before it spreads further." The king nodded, appreciating their foresight. "Then we begin." Inside the chamber, scrolls and ledgers lay scattered across tables, illuminated by enchanted crystals that cast a soft blue glow. The room smelled of parchment and candle wax, a scent that seemed to anchor the mind. The Omega quickly scanned the papers, their hands moving deftly, their eyes sharp. The king watched, noting the determination in every movement, the way the Omega seemed both familiar and almost untouchable in their skill. Hours passed as they pieced together fragmented messages, intercepted letters, and subtle clues. The deeper they delved, the more the web of betrayal revealed itself. Names of counselors, nobles, and even some distant relatives of the consort appeared repeatedly, hinting at alliances built in secret, alliances meant to weaken the Alpha King's rule. "You see," the Omega said, their voice calm but urgent, "the ceremony was never just a union. It was the starting point of a plan to remove you entirely. They expected compliance, not resistance." The king's gaze softened, almost imperceptibly, toward the Omega. "And you returned to warn me. Why, after all these years?" The Omega's expression flickered, a shadow of memory passing over their face. "Because even in exile, I could not forget the truth of your reign. I could not allow you to fall, not to ambition disguised as loyalty." For a moment, silence filled the chamber, heavy with unspoken words and the tension of shared history. The king realized how much he had underestimated the Omega, how their wisdom and courage had always been present, hidden beneath what he once considered weakness. And now, in the flickering light of these truths, he felt a stir he had not expected: respect, admiration, and something far more dangerous: longing. Their investigation was interrupted by a soft creak from the door. The king's hand instinctively moved to his sword, the Omega by his side, alert and ready. A figure slipped into the chamber, cloaked and careful. The Alpha King's eyes narrowed. "Show yourself," he commanded. The figure hesitated, then stepped forward. It was a messenger, pale and trembling, holding a sealed letter. "My king," the messenger said, bowing low, "this was left at the gates. It bears a warning and a threat." The king took the letter, breaking the seal with careful precision. The words within were written in haste but were clear. A traitor in the council had already moved against the king, planning to strike at dawn. The message ended with a chilling line: "You will find that even shadows can betray you." The king's face hardened. "Dawn," he said quietly, "we do not have long." The Omega studied the letter. "We must act carefully. Any sudden move could alert the conspirators. They will watch for signs of suspicion." The king's mind raced. He had faced armies, assassins, and monsters beyond imagination, yet the thought of betrayal from those closest to him brought a tension deeper than any blade could inflict. He realized the Omega was right, caution was necessary, but so was action. As night deepened, they moved through the palace, visiting wards, checking locks, and consulting hidden passages known only to the king. The Omega led the way, their knowledge of secret corridors and hidden vantage points proving invaluable. With each step, the king's respect grew, and with it, a deeper, more personal tension. He found himself studying the Omega not for strategy alone, but for the subtle strength and grace in their every movement. In a hidden courtyard, they paused. Moonlight spilled across stone, illuminating statues of ancient kings and queens. The silence was heavy, almost sacred. The Omega turned to the king, eyes intense. "You must understand," they said, "that loyalty is not given lightly. Even your closest advisors may be tempted by greed or fear, but you have something rare, a mind that can see the truth, and a heart that can act upon it." The king exhaled, feeling a mix of gratitude and something he could not name. "And you?" he asked softly. "Do you trust me now after all these years?" The Omega's gaze softened, though their expression remained steady. "I trust that you will choose wisely, but trust is not enough. We must act. We must prevent the betrayal before it takes root." Suddenly, a rustling sound echoed from the shadows of the garden. Both drew their weapons instinctively, moving as one toward the source. There, at the edge of the courtyard, a shadowy figure disappeared into the mist. The Alpha King's heart thumped. A spy, a messenger of danger, or the conspirator themselves. The Omega's eyes followed the figure. "They are close," they murmured. "Closer than we think. The conspirator knows we are aware, and they will strike soon." The tension between them grew as they returned to the palace's interior. Every hallway, every door, seemed to hold a potential threat. The king's pride and experience guided them, yet he found that he could not act without the Omega's counsel. Their partnership, uneasy at first, had become essential. In their presence, he felt both vulnerability and strength, a strange, intoxicating combination. As the night wore on, the king and Omega discovered coded messages hidden in seemingly innocent ledgers. Each clue revealed more of the conspirators' plan, more of the allies ready to betray, and more of the danger that hung over the kingdom like a storm cloud. By the time the first hints of dawn began to touch the horizon, the king realized the depth of the threat. The ceremony had been only a distraction, a lure meant to weaken him while the conspirators moved in secret. And now, armed with knowledge, he prepared for the inevitable confrontation. The Omega watched him, their expression unreadable but steady. "The first move will be ours," they said. "We must strike before they think us aware." The king nodded. "And the risk?" he asked quietly. "The risk is everything," the Omega replied. "But the reward, survival, loyalty, truth, is worth it, and perhaps trust." The Alpha King felt a shiver run down his spine. He had led armies, faced curses, and stared death in the face, yet the uncertainty of betrayal cut deeper than any blade. Yet with the Omega by his side, a flicker of hope ignited. He realized that trust, once broken and rebuilt, could become stronger than steel. They spent the final hours of night preparing, checking every passage, every guard, and every hidden mechanism within the palace. The conspirators were clever, but the king and Omega were patient, observant, and united. The tension between them simmered, unspoken yet palpable, a delicate thread weaving danger, trust, and something deeper, a connection neither could yet define. As the first light of dawn began to streak the sky, the palace seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere in the shadows, the conspirator moved, unaware that the king and Omega were already awake, already prepared, and already watching. The Alpha King turned to the Omega. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice calm yet carrying the weight of command. The Omega met his gaze, steady and unwavering. "I am," they said. "But remember, not all shadows are what they seem, and some betray even when unseen." A silence fell between them, thick and heavy with anticipation. The kingdom's future, the threat of betrayal, and the fragile bond between two souls hung in balance. And as the first rays of sunlight touched the palace towers, one truth became clear. The day would bring danger, revelations, and a test of loyalty unlike any they had faced before. The conspirator was out there, moving closer with every passing moment. And the Alpha King, once alone in his throne room, now had an ally, one who had been rejected, misunderstood, and underestimated, yet whose presence could change everything. The forest beyond Erendor's walls was alive with whispers. Mist curled among the gnarled trees like ghostly fingers, and the air carried the scent of damp earth and decay. The Alpha King moved carefully, every sense alert, his sword drawn and ready. Beside him, the Omega followed silently, eyes sharp, reading the shadows as if they held the secrets of the world. "The hostage," the Omega murmured. "They have brought someone close to you. They seek to weaken your heart before they strike at your rule." The king's jaw tightened. His mind had anticipated danger, armies, and sorcery, yet the thought of a trusted companion, perhaps even a friend, taken and used as a tool of manipulation, sent a cold shiver down his spine. His pride in command demanded action, but his heart, hidden behind years of armor, tensed with fear. They moved through the forest like shadows themselves, silent, alert, careful not to give their position away. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig seemed amplified in the quiet morning. Even the birds seemed still, as if the forest itself awaited the coming storm. "Look there," the Omega whispered, pointing toward a narrow path partially hidden by fog. "Footprints, 2 sets. One belongs to the conspirator, the other, a prisoner, dragged and unwilling." The king nodded. "We follow, quietly. We cannot risk discovery." Hours passed as they tracked the conspirators' movements. The deeper they went, the stranger the forest became. Trees twisted unnaturally, roots forming shapes that seemed almost deliberate, guiding or warning them. Small enchantments and wards, remnants of an old magic, shimmered faintly in the fog. The Omega's hand brushed over a rune etched into a tree trunk, and it glowed softly under their touch. "This is old magic," the Omega said. "It can conceal or mislead. We must be careful, or we may walk straight into a trap." The king's eyes narrowed. He had faced monsters and curses before, yet there was something different about this forest, as if it watched, as if it judged. He tightened his grip on the sword, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. Finally, they reached a clearing. The sun broke faintly through the fog, revealing a small, ruined temple. Stones were overturned, moss crawling over carved faces of forgotten gods. And there, bound and shivering, was the hostage, a loyal counselor the king had trusted for years. Their eyes widened in relief and fear as the king approached. "Do not move," the king commanded the conspirator, stepping into view. His armor gleamed faintly in the morning light, and the sword at his side was more than a weapon, it was a statement. "Release them, and no harm will come beyond what is necessary." The conspirator emerged from the shadows, cloaked and calm, their expression unreadable. "Ah, the Alpha King," they said, voice smooth and deliberate. "You move well for one so blinded by trust." "And you," they said, nodding toward the Omega, "have returned from exile, brave but foolish." The king's eyes narrowed. "Your plots end here, your betrayal is exposed. You sought to manipulate, to control, to destroy, but you underestimated the power of truth and the courage of those who stand against you." The conspirator smiled faintly. "Do you believe it is courage alone that wins, or is it fear? You are surrounded by shadows, and yet you think you see clearly, but even shadows can hide the heart of betrayal." The king's mind raced. Every instinct screamed danger, yet he had learned the value of patience. "You will not win. Not today, not ever." The conspirator laughed softly. "We shall see." They stepped closer to the hostage, raising a dagger that glimmered unnaturally in the morning light. Before the conspirator could strike, the Omega moved. Swift, precise, and unyielding, they blocked the attack, their blade clashing against the dagger with a ringing sound that echoed through the clearing. Sparks flew, catching the morning light, as the two combatants faced each other, one fueled by ambition and deceit, the other by wisdom and courage. The king advanced simultaneously, closing the distance between them and the conspirator. "Release them now," he demanded, voice like iron. The conspirator faltered for a moment, their eyes flicking toward the combined presence of the king and the Omega. For the first time, doubt appeared on their face. "You are united," they whispered, almost to themselves. The battle was swift but intense. The conspirator moved with skill and cunning, but the king and Omega moved as one, a partnership forged through trust, respect, and the shared desire to protect. The king's sword struck true, forcing the conspirator back, while the Omega disarmed them with precise movements that left no room for error. Finally, the conspirator stumbled, trapped between the two. Sweat and dust covered their face, and their eyes, once so confident, now flickered with fear. You may have won," they admitted, voice shaking, "but the game is far from over." The king stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "Your game ends here. The kingdom will not fall to shadows, and loyalty will be rewarded, not bought with treachery." The Omega untied the hostage, who collapsed into the king's arms with relief and gratitude. The bond between the king and Omega, strengthened by shared struggle, had proven unbreakable. Yet even as the danger receded, the forest seemed to whisper warnings, reminding them that threats often returned in unexpected forms. After securing the hostage, the king and Omega moved to a vantage point above the clearing. From there, they could see the forest stretching endlessly, shadows twisting in ways both natural and unnatural. The conspirator, though defeated, had vanished into the mist, clever, patient, and dangerous even in retreat. The king's heart was heavy, not with fear, but with the realization of how fragile trust could be. "We have won today," he said quietly, his gaze fixed on the distant trees. "But betrayal lurks still. We must remain vigilant." The Omega nodded, their eyes scanning the forest. "Yes, but remember, victory is not only about defeating enemies. It is about understanding them, predicting their moves, and knowing when to act. And sometimes," they added, voice softening, "it is about knowing whom to trust with your heart." The king's pulse quickened. The tension between them, once unspoken, now hovered on the edge of acknowledgement. He had rejected this Omega in the past, yet now, in the heat of danger, he realized their presence was not only necessary, it was vital. As they descended from their vantage point, preparing to return to the palace, the forest shifted. Mist thickened, and the faint whispers of old magic stirred uneasily. The king's instincts told him that the conspirators' retreat was not final. Somewhere unseen, they planned the next move, and it would be as cunning and dangerous as before. The Omega glanced at him, sensing the thoughts unspoken. "You worry too much," they said lightly, though their eyes were serious. "The forest may hide dangers, but it also hides opportunities, and we have survived what few could." The king allowed a small, rare smile. "Perhaps," he admitted, "but this tension between caution and trust, between duty and something more, it is unfamiliar." The Omega's gaze softened. "Unfamiliar can be powerful," they said. "It can teach patience, sharpen instincts, and remind us that even in darkness there can be light." The journey back to the palace was quiet. Both walked side by side, alert but thoughtful, their bond strengthened by shared danger and unspoken understanding. The king reflected on how easily power could blind a ruler, how betrayal could lurk in the most trusted quarters, and how one person, once rejected, could change the course of his kingdom through courage and wisdom alone. When they reached the palace gates, the first rays of sunlight broke through the mists, illuminating stone towers and gilded spires. Guards who had been alerted to the night's danger bowed as the king and Omega passed, aware that a significant shift had occurred. The Alpha King, once solitary in his strength, now had a partner whose courage and insight could rival his own. Yet even as they entered the great hall, the conspirators' words echoed in the king's mind. The game is far from over. He knew they were right. The palace, the court, and the kingdom held threats yet unseen. But he also knew this. With the Omega at his side, he could face them, and perhaps even emerge stronger than before. Inside the hall, the courtiers had begun to murmur about the night's events. Some were fearful, others curious, and a few were envious. But the king paid them no heed. His attention was focused entirely on the Omega, who moved with quiet confidence, surveying the room as if the weight of centuries had passed through their hands. "You have proven yourself tonight," the king said softly. "And yet I feel there is more to learn from you and from myself." The Omega's eyes met his, steady and unwavering. "And there will be more," they replied. "More tests, more dangers, more choices, but together we can face them. Even when the shadows stretch long and the heart is uncertain, we can endure." The king nodded, the tension between them unspoken but undeniable. He had once rejected this Omega, yet now he realized that trust, courage, and perhaps even something deeper could emerge from the bond they had forged in the shadows of betrayal. The day stretched before them, filled with the promise of confrontation, revelation, and decisions that could shape the kingdom for generations. And somewhere in the twisting shadows of the palace, the defeated conspirator watched and waited, knowing that the next move would be critical, for both the Alpha King and the Omega, and for the fate of all Urindor. The cursed forest beyond Urindor's walls seemed alive with anticipation. Shadows moved like sentient beings, and the air shimmered with an uneasy magic. Even the trees, twisted and gnarled, whispered warnings as the Alpha King and the Omega stepped cautiously into the undergrowth. They were no longer merely tracking a conspirator. They were hunting a threat that could destroy the kingdom and test the strength of their fragile trust. The king's hand rested on the hilt of his sword, steady yet tense. "We must move carefully," he said. "This forest is unlike any battlefield I have known. The danger is not only from men but from the land itself." The Omega nodded. "The forest reacts to malice. It can mislead, trap, or even harm those who enter with deceit in their hearts. We must be vigilant but also patient. The conspirator believes they hold the advantage. They do not know we are prepared." They advanced in silence, stepping lightly over roots and stones, their senses stretched to the limit. Every rustle of leaves, every shadow shifting in the fog could signal an enemy. The Omega's presence was a quiet anchor, guiding the king through the forest's deceptive paths. Yet with each step, a tension grew, not from the danger alone, but from the unspoken bond that had formed between them in the trials of the past nights. Hours passed, and finally they reached a clearing. At its center stood the conspirator, their cloak fluttering in the cold wind, and the hostage, guarded yet unharmed, bound by a weak enchantment that shimmered faintly. The conspirator's eyes gleamed with a dangerous triumph. "Welcome," they said, voice smooth and deliberate. "I wondered how long it would take before you tracked me here. You are persistent, I will give you that, but persistence alone does not guarantee victory." The king's eyes narrowed. "Release them," he said, voice commanding. "Your schemes end here. The kingdom will not fall to your treachery." The conspirator's lips curled into a faint smile. "End, perhaps. Or perhaps this is only another chapter in the story. You see, Alpha King, trust is fragile. It can break in an instant. And hearts, even yours, can falter under pressure." The king's gaze shifted to the Omega, whose calm presence steadied his thoughts. "Not this time," the Omega said, stepping forward. "Not with us united. We act with courage, wisdom, and trust, qualities you cannot break." The conspirator laughed softly, raising their dagger, now glowing with an unnatural light. The forest responded, shadows shifted, wind howled, and the ground beneath their feet seemed to twist in warning. The Omega moved first, swift and precise, their sword meeting the dagger with a ringing clash. Sparks flew, catching the morning light that filtered through the mist. The king advanced simultaneously, his own blade flashing, cutting through the tension and danger like a beacon of authority. The battle was intense. The conspirator was clever and cunning, using the forest itself to conceal attacks, leading illusions and traps that tested the skill and resolve of both the king and the Omega. But the pair moved as one, silent communication, perfect timing, trust born of necessity. Each attack, each parry built on the last, their synergy overwhelming the conspirator. "You are united," the conspirator gasped, stumbling back. "More than I anticipated," the king pressed forward. "Unity is stronger than deception. And loyalty, true loyalty, cannot be broken by fear or ambition." The Omega moved beside him, disarming the conspirator with a precise strike that sent the dagger flying into the mist. They reached the hostage, releasing the weak enchantment binding them. Relief washed over the counselor's face as they stumbled toward the king, who caught them safely. The conspirator, realizing their defeat, made a desperate move. A spell of darkness meant to engulf the clearing. Shadows surged and twisted around them, trying to separate the king and Omega. Yet, in that moment of peril, the Alpha King acted. "Together," he said, eyes locking with the Omega's. Their hands brushed briefly as they joined forces, focusing will and strength. The shadows recoiled, unwilling to touch their combined resolve. Magic and courage intertwined, forcing the darkness back, until the conspirator fell to their knees, exhausted and defeated. "You cannot win," the king said, his voice steady, carrying both authority and quiet fury. The conspirator looked up, their eyes flickering with fear and awe. "Perhaps, but the game is never truly over," they whispered. Then, weakened and defeated, they vanished into the forest, leaving only whispers behind. The king sheathed his sword, exhaling. "It is done," he said, though the forest still hummed with hidden energy. The Omega stepped closer, their hand brushing his arm in a gesture both gentle and grounding. "For now," they said softly, "but vigilance is eternal." The king's gaze met theirs, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself a moment of vulnerability. "I once rejected you," he admitted quietly. "I thought you were unworthy, or perhaps I was too proud to see your value. But now I see everything. I see courage, wisdom, and a heart that can teach me what loyalty truly means." The Omega's eyes softened. "And I see that even the strongest hearts can learn. That even a king, feared and respected, can grow, can trust, and can love." A silence fell over the clearing, heavy with unspoken words. The mist curled around them, but it no longer seemed threatening. Instead, it framed a moment of connection, fragile yet powerful. Two souls, once divided by pride and misunderstanding, now united by trials, danger, and trust. The king extended a hand, not as a ruler to a subject, but as one human to another. The Omega took it, and in that simple gesture, years of pain, misunderstanding, and longing began to heal. "You saved me," the king said softly, and perhaps in doing so you saved more than just my life." The Omega smiled faintly. "And you," they replied, "saved me from doubt, from the fear that courage alone was not enough. Together, we are stronger than any shadow, any betrayal, any enemy." The forest seemed to quiet in acknowledgement. Even the ancient trees, witnesses to countless generations, leaned in as if to witness the bond formed in the crucible of danger. The hostage, now free and safe, looked between the king and Omega with gratitude. "Your courage and unity, it saved all of us," they said. "The kingdom owes you more than words can express." The king nodded, turning to the Omega. "The kingdom is safe, but our journey is not over. The conspirator may return, or others may rise. We must remain vigilant, together." The Omega placed a hand lightly on his arm. "Together," they agreed. And in that moment, something unspoken passed between them, a promise, a recognition of trust, and perhaps even the beginning of love. Neither had anticipated this when the ceremony was canceled, when betrayal first whispered in the night. Yet in facing danger, confronting past mistakes, and relying on one another, they had discovered something greater than duty, a bond that could withstand any shadow. As they made their way back through the forest, dawn breaking over the horizon, the Alpha King realized that strength alone could not protect a kingdom. Wisdom, courage, and trust, and the rare gift of someone willing to stand beside you, even when rejected, were what truly fortified the heart of a ruler. The Omega walked beside him, quiet and steady, their presence a reminder that the trials of the past had forged not only survival, but understanding and connection. And though dangers would surely come again, for the first time, the king did not feel alone. In the days that followed, the palace was calm, but vigilance remained. Guards were doubled, wards strengthened, and the council's loyalties quietly tested. Yet the Alpha King and the Omega moved together, partners in leadership, united by shared danger and the lessons of trust. The bond between them, once fractured, now stood unbreakable, ready to face whatever storms the kingdom or fate might send. And at night, when the palace was quiet and the world seemed still, the king and Omega would meet in the hidden chambers, speaking in whispers, sharing thoughts and learning each other's hearts. In those moments, the weight of crowns, conspiracies, and danger lifted, replaced by a rare and precious peace. The conspirator, though defeated, remained in the shadows, a reminder that vigilance was eternal. Yet the king no longer feared alone. With the Omega by his side, he had found something more than loyalty. He had found a companion, a guide, and perhaps, in time, a love that could endure the tests of destiny. The kingdom of Urendor stood tall and proud, its towers gleaming in the first light of day. But more than its walls or armies, it was the bond between two hearts, forged in shadow and danger, that promised a future stronger than fear, brighter than betrayal, and deeper than even the oldest magic. And so, as the morning sun rose over misty towers and twisting forests, the Alpha King and the Omega walked forward together, ready to face whatever came next, not just as ruler and counselor, but as equals, allies, and perhaps, in time, as two hearts bound by trust, courage, and something far more enduring,